Um, I'm just going to call Kelly back on stage to continue the introduction for Deb.
Thank you, Shay.
Oops.
It's all good. I was just saying to someone before at the networking table that technology was a little bit glitchy for us today. So here we are continuing with that theme. So kind of off script, Deb was one of our panelists at Ignition, and she brought really interesting insights that were quite a highlight for the team and myself. And we would often talk about the things that Deb was she was talking about the people side of AI implementation and the change management perspective. And so we have not forgotten about some of those really great insights that Deb brought forward. So when we were thinking about this mashup and who might we want to hear from who has a really, really unique and insightful perspective about change management, especially the people side, Deb Campbell was the one who came to mind. So if I was cut off before the beginning, she is the principal consultant and practice lead at Online Business Systems for change management. And like truly what sets her apart is her psychology and mediation background. Which she combines with a systems thinking approach and people-centered perspective, which I just think is so gold when it comes to change initiatives and laying out the strategy for how to do that successfully. It allows her to guide organizations towards unlocking their full potential with their most valuable asset, which of course is their people. Throughout Deb's career, she spearheaded large-scale transformations, emphasizing the critical role of strong and aligned leadership. Her practical insights and engaging style empower leaders to approach change with both confidence, clarity, and leaving a lasting impact on the organizations that she works with. I am very, very thrilled to have Deb here today to share her knowledge and to inspire us with her approach to change management. And I would like to say, come on to the virtual stage, Deb, and hopefully you won't have any technical issues anymore like I have. But again, thanks everyone for your patience, and let's welcome Deb onto the stage.
On the stage? Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me today. We have had some real challenges with the technology, and so I'm just a little rattled. So I'm just gonna, take a couple deep breaths and forge ahead. So and get started. Okay, so I've got Shaylin, because I was unable to share the presentation myself, Shaylin is sharing for me, and so I'll cue her to move slides forward as we go. Move forward, Shaylin. Okay, I thought I'd start with this slide just to be a little provocative and to get everybody to think a little bit. I saw this post on LinkedIn about maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. It might even be longer now. And I was compelled to respond. In retrospect, really, it was somebody who was trying to sort of flog their own practice in building up leadership. And so, posted this, and I reposted and responded. And I've never received such like I went viral. My kids kept saying, you're going viral, Mom. It was, over 60,000 views, and it had been reposted. My posts have been reposted, 30 times, and I got tons of comments and friend invites from it. And so it's really, because I think this is really hitting a nerve. I think that change management is really changing as a practice and evolving. And so when I see something like this, I think about, some of those initial change models that were developed, in the 1970s, when changes happened rarely in an organization. It might have been a process change. It might have been, a little bit of the advent of technology. But in today's organizations, the volume and velocity of change is so significant, up about 183% from what it was 10 years ago. And so I think we need to sort of rethink what we think change management is and expand that. So that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. In terms of the agile also being dead, I think that's a whole other tech mashup, and I would love to dive into that one too at another time. My own thinking is, agile is really struggling in a lot of organizations, mostly because that systemic change management view has not been applied, and Agile hasn't been properly in the rollout in the organization. So, okay, so next slide. This slide really is one of my favorites to really try and understand what is change management and what does it even do. I think, some folks really think that change management is just about making people happy. It's about sprinkling some fairy dust on projects and hoping they work. I've had questions when I've done presentations like, how does change management help really poor leadership decisions? And I'm like, we just don't. We don't. It's not magic. It's an approach and a set of principles to try and help the project, get the full benefits, the full ROI. So when you see that line across the bottom, that's the installation of a project or an initiative. And I really like to remind people to think beyond technology. Technology is one, a major significant changes that happen in organizations, but so do changes in how we deliver projects, how we develop and deliver, how we manage, staff and HR. So there's a wide variety of changes. In fact, executing your strategy is change, and so it goes beyond just a technology rollout. So that bottom is, the initiative has been installed. It's, we did what we needed to do. The project managers, and the organization project team did what they needed to do to get it, up and going. But oh my goodness, we don't have that full implementation. We don't have people fully using it the way they should, or there's all kinds of reasons for why, it hasn't been fully implemented. And that difference there is the value gap. And that's what change management looks to help you close on your initiatives and on your strategy, is what's going on there, that we've got something launched, but it's not being fully used. Traditionally, we've talked about, it's adoption. There's resistance, there's stakeholder, and it's like bad stakeholders. We provided this amazing thing for you, and now stakeholders aren't using it in the way that they need to. And I'm just gonna challenge up thinking a little bit and talk about some of the reasons beyond just stakeholders that those things don't happen. Next slide. Sorry. Yeah. So if you can just close your eyes for a minute and think back on a project that a particularly tough project that you were working on, and just think to yourself, what were some of the barriers? What were some of the barriers to success on our project? What did we really struggle with? Maybe we limped across the finish line, but we sure didn't, get, what we intended out of this. What were some of those barriers? When I go into an organization and I do a little bit of a deep dive in some of their lessons learned and how their projects have been successful or haven't, and I do a bit of a deep dive in their lessons learned, I find very conservatively at least 65%, even as high as 80% of those, lessons learned, those struggles that are identified in past projects are related to change management. They're very rarely related to technology problems. Sometimes they are. Sometimes a vendor can't deliver what they said they were going to deliver, and there's those sorts of things. But often, it's the people problems that are really causing the biggest barriers. So we're going to talk about what those people problems are. So the other thing I like to do is to sort of frame change management in, what are the business problems we're trying to solve? I think this resonates much better for people. I'm just going to move in so I can see a little bit better. And, this isn't sprinkling fairy dust. So the first and foremost function, a business problem that change management helps to solve, is to identify and mitigate risk. And this isn't just about, unhappy stakeholders. It's about leaders that aren't aligned and the incredible difficulty that makes for success. It's about leaders who don't have the time often or necessarily the change skills to lead the initiative. As a change manager or change practitioner, when you come into an organization, your main job, one of your primary jobs is to shore up those leaders so that they can lead the change. You don't come in to lead the change. The single greatest critical success factor for successful change is leadership skills. So that is a business problem we can help to solve, is to support leaders to do what they need to do. Defining and tracking metrics, making sure that we're hitting our targets. Otherwise, why did we do this? Assess and address stakeholder impacts. Who's going to be hit by this? And not just who's going to be sort of immediately hit by this, but having that systems thinking view as to, what are the rippling impacts of this particular change initiative. So for instance, we're really excited to roll out a CRM, a customer relationship management system in an organization to make it easier to track sales and to provide better service to our customers. But have we thought about what that will do to the impact to our salespeople, the impact to the supply chain, the impact to other parts, finance, accounting, the other parts of the organization that are going to be impacted by this. Shailene mentioned my background in psychology and mediation, and also in communications, but I did some training as part of that in systems thinking, and I really think that my systems thinking training is what I use the most often in my change work, and quite frankly, even in my personal life, is trying to the interconnectedness of all the pieces of the whole organization, so that you can prepare the whole organization and help the whole organization understand what the impacts of this change are going to be. Engaging stakeholders to minimize resistance. I'll talk about that in a minute. Identify barriers to sustainment. So an example of that is we want leaders in this organization to make collective decisions about what should be prioritized rather than siloed decisions. So we want to make sure that leaders are working together to prioritize initiatives and throw their weight behind those initiatives that are prioritized. So we need to make sure that, that their reward systems and their recognition systems are set up to align with that. So if we're still rewarding our executive team or our leadership team on delivering on their own siloed initiatives and not that overarching collective goal, then there's a mismatch in those systems in our organization and what we're trying to achieve. Preparing stakeholders for role changes often happens with change. Balancing the pace of change to prevent conflicts, and I'm going to talk about a great tool to help you do that. And build resilience in the organization to change. We've moved from, again, one-off changes here and there to this massive volume and velocity of change. And so we really need to think about, what tools do we need to help do that? Next slide. Okay, just one last slide, just kind of overarching about change management. Change management has grown and changed. If you're looking at, the baby ape there, practically on all fours, that was, some of those beginnings of, we just need to make sure there's comms and training available for these process changes or these technology changes. Change management itself has evolved to, a critical business function in an organization when it's done well at a more strategic level, so that, again, it takes into consideration that whole systems view of the whole portfolio of changes that are happening in an organization, and how can we support them, and how can we bring our stakeholders along with us. Next slide. Okay, so here's my own little top 5 critical success factors for change, and these are if I'm going into an organization and I've only got a short period of time, these are the things that I'm really going to try and focus on, because I think this is where you're going to get the best bang for your buck, and it really helps you focus on the intended outcomes of the project, not just delivering and dragging stakeholders with you, but the intended outcomes for the project. This list is in like a top 5 down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 list, kind of like a Johnny Carson or one of those other late night show. Letterman used to do that sort of top list. So we'll start with number 5. Next slide. Number 5, get clarity on what good looks like and measure along the way. Pivot your planning if you are not meeting targets. So, I know most folks know this. You need to understand what dials you're trying to move here. And if you're not moving the dials, if you're not seeing, you're not starting to meet your graduated goals, it's telling you something's off, something's wrong. Next slide. You see the little canary in the coal mine. I think missing your goals for your metrics is critical information. You need to make sure that the metrics that you set align with the goals of the project or the business problem you're trying to solve. Sometimes when change managers come in, they measure, I sent this many communications out, I talked to this many people did training, and that's all great. That's a form of measurement, but it's really not about tracking the measures to actually deliver on what the intended outcomes for your projects really are. And that's, again, trying to close that gap, right? That implementation and installation gap. And make sure your metrics are actionable, that you can easily make changes to them and see movement. That key metrics are as simple as possible. Too many metrics and too many complicated concepts does nothing to help a project team or an organization head towards success. Ensure that metrics matter to stakeholders. The fewer and the more key metrics that you can get, of course, the easier that is to communicate, and the easier it is for the organization to understand why you're doing it. I worked with a large corporate client who was redefining how they delivered projects in their organization, redefining their strategy to execution pipeline. And they started with a very simple metric, which is that currently we're only meeting 50% of the projects that enter a pipeline ever really fully get delivered. Not a great stat, and a really compelling stat to get people to have a really look at something we're doing here internally isn't working. So how can we improve that, and how can we track that to start moving towards success? And so again, just that idea that when you're not hitting those metrics, you need to start to ask yourself some questions. What's wrong here? Have we in fact deployed a solution that isn't going to address the business problems that we're trying to solve? Often in organizations, we jump on that kind of bright and shiny thing, and we don't necessarily prioritize in an organization. Again, a whole other lunch and learn conversation around prioritization of initiatives in an organization, but we compete for resources to just to jump on top of something bright and shiny. Is it really going to solve? Do you actually really have that business problem? Does this solution actually help you to move the dial on that? Where is this in the priorities of things that are happening in this organization? All organizations only have so many financial and human resources, and when they get constrained, you really need to think carefully about the solutions you're picking and where that falls in the prioritized order. So the canary in the coal mine. If I'm not hitting those metrics, or if I'm not trending towards that, I got to stop and think about what's really going on here. Next. This is my favorite. This is my current favorite topic in change management. Everybody knows the word resistance. I use it because people understand what it means. I don't love the word because I think the connotation is that people are intentionally putting up barriers to success. And I think that's almost rarely actually the case. Again, when you consider the volume and velocity of change that's happening in organizations, in competing priorities and competing siloed goals and competing resources, there are often really, really good reasons for why employees are resisting. So I instead encourage lean into the resistance and try and understand what it's telling you. So instead of we got to squash this, we got to push stakeholders through this, drag them along, have a look and understand what really is the resistance all about. What's the information that you're not seeing here? What are you not understanding about this change? If we can go to the next slide. And it fits nicely with my next critical risk factor, which is engagement. I think these two things go together. If you're not engaging your stakeholders and your organization really early in big critical changes, you are really presenting barriers to success that are going to be really difficult to deal with. Rather than engaging really early with your primary stakeholders and having them help you to problem solve and to provide that feedback along the way, that is not only going to help you come up with a better solution, it will improve your employee engagement, and it'll also make for a much more successful change. An example of this is when I talked about improving that strategy to execution pipeline. We heard really early on, you can tell when you're starting with a project or a transformation, when things are, you can start to hear rumors, and you can tell when people are really, are pushing back and aren't quite on board. That's when you need to really double down on engagement. You need to really dig and understand why that's happening. With that particular initiative, we did a series of engagement meetings with the VPs and the directors, because this is primarily the stakeholders that were being impacted. Those were our internal customers, to try and understand what that was all about. We didn't bring a presentation with us. We just arrived in these meetings and just wanted to have a conversation, a two-way conversation, and really being open to hearing what, in fact, the concerns really were, and how we could help mitigate those together so that we could end up with success. We started those meetings, and then we created a change advisory group made up of those very same stakeholders, many who were the biggest resistors in the beginning, and provided regular feedback mechanisms and touch points to meet with them, to talk about how we were, as a project team, delivering on this, and how we could how we could better mitigate what some of their real life concerns were. So they were things like, I don't have enough people for this right now. Yeah, this is really cool, but I don't understand how, I now have to jump through all these hoops to get a project delivered. Is there a way we can streamline this? The project, from the internal customer perspective, was starting to feel like the support services that were delivering these projects, whereas it was the tail wagging the dog rather than the other way around. And it was making it difficult and presenting barriers, making it very hard for primary sponsors to deliver on the things that they committed to. So I really encourage this graphic. Just a quick little shout out. You'll see quite a few of these Idea Leap graphics in my presentations. I just love them. And just a shout out to Justin Belaski, who creates them at Idea Leap. So you can see that concept of inflicting change, and rather than inviting change, let's participate together. When you can co-create, absolutely do that. When you can bring people in and co-create solutions together, not always possible, but you can always consult your stakeholders internally and externally to find out what's going to work best and where some of the barriers are going to be. So why do this? Again, organizations are changing, leadership styles are changing, the volume and velocity of change has increased rapidly. And so you can't, you can't just always have that, like, this is urgent. And, that old sort of style of rolling out changes, creating urgency. It's more about, let's set a vision for where we're going with all of these changes, packaging them together, and looking to engage your employees in that long-term vision, and so they can see themselves and see where how they're contributing to that. That's the number one best way to help build resilience, is to include people. And then of course there's the realities of staff retention and the talent wars, and the ideas of innovation, and that requires trust and engagement. So all these new concepts in an organization lend themselves and require that we engage people more frequently and all the way along. Okay, next slide. Just wanted to highlight, the big bad wolf of urgency. While sometimes that's true, we haven't got, we need to deal with something. Not everything in an organization can be urgent. And in fact, it's just super stressful for everybody. And people then tend to disengage and resist. if we can instead package the changes, look at our overarching portfolio of changes in an organization. And I'm going to hint again at a tool I'm going to share with you to help you do that. If you can do that and be transparent about what is happening in your organization, where you're headed, how you're considering the stakeholders that are going to be impacted, how you're considering when things, the volume and velocity, and when things hit them and when they don't, and trying to be considerate of other operational things that are happening in the organization, you'll get a much more receptive group of stakeholders. Next slide. And going with resistance is this engage early, engage often. And I just wanted to call out, again, another one of Justin's great graphics, the difference between communication, which is one way, and dialogue, which is two ways. So typically, that four-legged monkey in the evolution, it was, let's send some emails, let's send out a slide deck, and everyone's going to love this, and we're good. Today in organizations, again, packaging that whole portfolio of changes, how really explaining how each one of the pieces are going to help you meet your strategic goals, talking with your stakeholders, engaging them in part of it is really going to help you move the dial on delivering. Next slide. So just some ideas, like what does engagement look like? I'm not sure if any of you have ever participated in a change canvas session, but a change canvas session it's one of my favorite tools to use in change. Can be used early, can be used often in a change. It's essentially where you gather a group of impacted stakeholders, representation from all the impacted stakeholders, your executive sponsor, your primary sponsor, your project teams, etc., into a room together, and really walk through the change, the benefits, the risks, and look for input from your impacted stakeholders really early on, asking questions like, where do you see the potential risks here? And encouraging that kind of dialogue early on, so that you can start to plan and mitigate for those risks instead of getting bit by them later down the road and realizing you've got that gap there. You're not getting that full implementation. Change advisory groups. Lately I've really been recommending impacted stakeholder representation, even on project team level. So you want to invite 10 people, but 1 or 2 that can help you see through the lens of the impacted stakeholder what might be happening and what might come, so that they can help inform you, and you can adapt as you go to be considerate of that and to think that through. Feedback loops whenever possible. Lean coffees, these are open office hour sessions, that you can advertise. Come and hear about, this particular project. Got questions? Come and ask us. And again, it's that idea of open dialogue, of transparency, of really trying to help people understand and listening to people. Excuse me. And then of course, if you ask for feedback and don't respond, that will increase the lack of trust in your organization. So what you need to do is this is what we heard. Here are the things that we can help to mitigate this. Here's some things we just don't have any choices on, but that reciprocating their intention of sharing with you and making sure that you share back how you're going to use that information goes a long way to build trust. Next slide. So this is just the change canvas at a high level, what it looks like and the benefits of it. You literally walk away with a very high level change strategy at the end of it. You've identified all the impacted stakeholders. You've identified who needs to know what. You've identified where the risks are. And you've done that jointly as a group. And so you've got that really early buy-in and a really solid place to start with your change strategy. Next slide. There's a change canvas in action. This was, we did this at a university in Western Canada, and super successful. Sometimes it's a process that freaks people out a little bit in the beginning, because it's very fluid and it can seem a bit chaotic. People get up and add stickers to the board as they think of things, but that's just part of the whole process, is letting encouraging that dialogue and that sharing. Next slide, please. Number two and number one on my list are really kind of, I can't decide which one I think is more important. But they're both very closely connected. But this one is, leadership alignment and change leadership skills are the most critical factors in change success. So if this graphic I love, if I only had an hour to make the change, I would spend most of the hour on leadership alignment. I would spend most of the time making sure that leaders understand exactly what's going to happen here, that they're prepared to lead the change, and I would be identifying risks really early on when, Joe in the PMO and Fred in finance see things really, really different, where they see things really differently. And in fact, if that doesn't get sorted and that doesn't get worked out, it will ripple down through the organization into your teams, and you'll lose that value gap again, because there's that lack of leadership alignment. So critically important. And I got to say, sadly, very rarely do I see executive leadership teams or senior leadership teams that are aligned on changes in the organization, that are aligned behind strategy and what those strategic goals are. And so really a critical component to success. Next slide. These are some of the things that change leaders are responsible for. The reality is leaders are responsible for the success of everything in the organization. Some of the comments on that change management is dead was like, well, we can't bother with change management because the leaders are weak. And interesting perspective. Agreed, there are some leaders who are still growing and developing and don't, understand their role or their impact in an organization, but that can't stop us from trying to support them to do what they need to do to make changes and transformations possible. If I'm entering an organization, the first two things that I'm going to be looking to do is to really, which is my number one success factor, is to really understand the organization, the landscape, the history, etc., and really look to shore up the leaders. If you can do those two things, you can really pave your way for a lot better success, rather than just sort of hopping into one project and trying to deliver on success without understanding that big picture. Leaders don't have time for all the responsibility they have. Leaders love the support that you can give them. When you can provide them with opportunities to get in front of the change, when you can provide them with the resources to speak, key messages, decks, like whatever they need to stand out in front of the change and do what they need to do, you're creating much more value in the change management space and closing that gap than almost anything else you can do. Next slide. I just talked about this. They need support. They need coaching. They need some training. They need to be able to talk to you, whenever things aren't going well, and so you can help them problem solve. Next slide. And now we're down to my number one, tied for number two, depends on the day. Critical success factor, and that's to really, really understand the organizational context and the initiative before you choose the change approach. So what do I mean by this? I mean, if this is a process level change on a small team, then some of those traditional change management approaches of identifying stakeholders, sharing, the why, doing some basic communication and training is probably going to be enough. If this is transformative change, if this is, large scale, if it's impacting things like delivering on your strategy to execution pipeline, that needs a much more intensive and an engagement-based approach to that change. So I think often what we're seeing in organizations is change practitioners or organizations who have one toolbox and they use the same set of tools no matter what the issue is, and it's just not enough. All change management methodologies have real value, and they're all great, but if we're not looking sort of at the context and the organization for which this is happening in, and trying to understand that and plan for that, then we're really missing. We're missing a lot of key data and information that can help us. Next slide. So when I'm talking about an organizational and initiative evaluation, like that assessment, I'm talking about asking questions like, what problem are we trying to solve here? What business problem are we trying to solve? So in that last one with the pipeline, it was we're only delivering on 50% of our initiatives. Like, what's going on here? We need to do something about this. What are the organizational attributes? So what is going to make this difficult in this particular organization? Some of the trickiest organizations I've worked in is actually post-secondary education, and I'll tell you why. It's because what I didn't realize until I was working with them is that the faculties are actually really quite siloed and operate almost completely separately from each other in many post-secondary organizations. So the example I was giving to you about the university in Western Canada, they weren't even actually all using Teams. Some were using Teams, some were using Zoom, some were using other platforms. So there was such disparity and variety between the different silos that it was very difficult for that technology group to deliver initiatives that were meeting the needs of everybody. So that took a lot of foundational building to pull technology groups together in those different silos, to start to develop a change advisory committee from across the organization and start to work across silos to make that happen. So the attributes of the organization you're working in really help you determine, what the best approach is, and what kind of lead-in work you might have to do before you actually try and launch this project. What are the communication channels, etc.? Okay, I'll move on to the. No, that's good. Next one. That's good. And I'm just going to give you a little bonus tip. My bonus tip here is based on everything I've shared with you so far. I hope what I've communicated is that changes can look no two changes are the same. No two organizations are the same. And so you really need to think carefully about, assigning what kind of resources you're assigning to support initiatives. If it's a smaller initiative, can somebody with less experience and with more limited set of tools, can they support it? Yes, for sure they can. Is this bigger picture? Do we need to call in the big guns so that we're really getting that kind of strategic guidance and advice and that big picture view to your change? That's really critically important. So making sure that you understand what you're looking for and what you need, and then getting the resource, assigning the resource, or hiring the resource that matches that need. Okay, next slide. So all of these tips that I've shared with you are really around looking for those bigger components in your change initiatives to help you be more successful, rather than just sort of doing a deep dive and getting involved in just like communication plans and stakeholder engagement and stakeholder assessments. Those things are important. I'm not saying that they aren't, but really trying to understand well the change and trying to match your approach to what the organization needs. So one thing that I think is so fantastic, I've been wanting to develop an enterprise level change heat map to share, to use in organizations. And I just personally do not have the technology skills for that. And so my esteemed colleague, Cherise Sousa from our Online Change team, helped the change team to design a change heat map in Power BI that is just pretty spectacular. And I think could provide a lot of value in organizations, and something for you to think about just in terms of, do you have these kinds of tools, or should you be developing these kind of tools in your own organizations to help? So here's some of those, obvious internal concerns. Oh my God, my teams are already so tapped. I can't handle any more changes. Wait, like, we're doing this now, so do we just drop everything we're doing over here and do this? That whole idea of how do we get everything done? Next slide. So a potential solution, a change heat map. And so what a change heat map does is it shows you, and maybe we'll just move to the next slide. excuse me. Yeah, so that's, you get an idea. It's a dashboard. It's Power BI dashboard that shows you the volume and velocity of change that you have going on across your whole organization at any given time. So this can help for data-driven decision-making about, planning the staging of rollouts of things, the prioritization of rollouts when things make sense. So at any given time, you can have a look at how many changes are happening in your organization and also how many operational activities are happening at the same time. So you can plug all that data into this dashboard so you can look. So for instance, probably we wouldn't hit the finance team with a new technology rollout at year end because we know it's too busy for them. So having all that information sort of available so you can see, so the whole organization and leaders can see at a high level what's happening across an organization at any given time. And you can identify by stakeholder group, who's being impacted by what and when, so that you can be more thoughtful about your planning. So maybe we should push this one back a little because, the poor finance team has all of these things going on right now. Or, this particular high priority initiative is using this set of constrained resources right now for this period of time. So it's probably not a good idea to do a similar project that's going to be tapping our tech team. So it gives you that overview, that high level view. It can show you where bottlenecks, or potentially should happen. And the biggest thing is it really helps to prevent taxing your resources, your internal resources, so that you can prevent change fatigue and collision and burnout. A large scale organization I was working with just implemented something similar to this, and it's going to make a huge difference for them. When we met to talk with the technology team, they talked about, we're knee deep in this, and then all of a sudden this project comes in over here, we didn't know, and now we're dropping this and we're moving over to dealing with this. And so part of the reason why, only 50% of projects were being delivered is that they weren't being thoughtfully paced and planned and integrated. So this idea of looking at your whole change portfolio at any given time in an organization as you're introducing new changes, I think can really help to create better success. Next slide. I'll skip this too. Let's just skip this one. I think I should cover that. And so before we get into questions, I just wanted to let you know we're happy. Charisse and I, or anybody else from the change team, is happy to come out and do a bit of a demo to anybody who's interested in the heat map to sort of understand, how this could help your organizations. We don't, online doesn't sell the tools separately, but it could help you to sort of understand how, enterprise change management services could benefit your organization, or even just something for you to think about yourself in your own organizations. Okay, so I'm good to answer some questions.
We'll give the technology here a moment to catch up, hopefully. Deb, that was incredible. I'm looking at the attendees here are probably fascinated by change because this is leadership, as you said. This is executing on strategy. This is what we all do. So yes, round of applause, please, everybody, for Deb, because that was wonderful. And the offer to demo the heat map, which sounds incredible, is it's really, really cool. I can already think of all sorts of future events that we would love to have you back for. And perhaps even one for Tech Week if Online Business Systems wants to host one of their own.
I think we could do that for you. And just, a personal reach out to, if anybody wants to contact me and set something up, in your organizations, we can come and share, and we can come and talk a little bit more about, this enterprise level sort of view of change and how that can make such a difference. So
fantastic. Thank you again. We have so many questions. In terms of an indicator of how much energy and interest there is in this change topic, because it's broad, I just look at the Q&A section on the screen and it's loaded. Honestly, I think this is probably the most activity we've had for Q&As all year for any of our tech mashups. So again, kudos to you in terms of presenting on a very, very relevant topic. So let's have a look. If I look at the number one, one of the top. Yeah, it's still shifting, but it's like we have a tie here. So the first one is from Jennifer plus those who upvoted it. The question asks, what are some strategies for change management at a workplace while most folks are experiencing change fatigue? You spoke to it a little bit, but maybe you could talk a bit more.
Yeah, change fatigue is common. So if you think about that, stat that I threw out there, 183% increase in change in organizations in the last 10 years, like that's kind of mind blowing, right? That is just completely mind blowing. And have we adapted our approaches and our supports to keep up with that? The number one, I think, advice that I would have around other than managing the volume and velocity through tools like this, or even you can even do that on a spreadsheet, pull all your projects in and everything else that's happening in your organization and mapping out who's being hit by what, but using that kind of data-driven approach to inform, when you're to pace the change. I love to go in and do the deep dive on the lessons learned, because sometimes senior leaders don't think there's a problem. They just like, let's push. And I think if you start to look at lessons learned, or you start to really track, are we meeting full benefits of these projects that we're rolling out, and use that sort of data to help, educate and inform about, we could be doing so much more. We could be doing so much better if we were more thoughtful about how we prioritize things and how we roll things out. So I think those two things. And the last thing I would say is, in most organizations, change is happening to them and they're not part of it. So really trying to harness, your employees, your team, to work together on a vision and moving towards and explaining how each one of these initiatives moves you towards your strategic goals has a lot more value than you gotta do this, you gotta do that, and having it seem like chaos and all over the place, which leads to those feelings of change fatigue and overwhelm.
A bit like the slide, I think, where you talked about it, and it's lovely in terms of just the clarity of communication being one way versus how are you encouraging the dialogue, right? I think and it's probably very relevant for this next question here. It says, what do you do when you're not getting feedback from the team about the proposed, change?
So if somebody said to me, I've offered genuine opportunities for feedback and I'm not getting any, I would say that's probably telling you there's something else going on. Okay. That's data. That's data for you to think about. Is it because many times that they've been asked before, they haven't been listened to? Is it because there's a lack of trust in the organization, so people are scared to provide honest feedback? Is it because they don't have time because there's too many other things going on? Like really trying to understand why that's happening, why you're not getting that kind of genuine, ongoing feedback. I personally recommend anonymous survey. When you do surveys with a group like that, start with anonymous surveys where there's that idea that I can say what I need to say without repercussions of that. So I would see that would tell me that there's something else going on in the organization. Either there's too much change or there's not enough trust. And that requires, an approach to your culture, to build a culture and working with your leaders to help manage that.
That's a great suggestion. Makes me think a bit about Ted Lasso. I don't know if anyone here has watched it, right? Asking for feedback in season 1 and getting it through the little box and helping to change the shower pressure, So feedback, yes, always welcome. Anonymous, whether it be online or through a shoebox.
And there are, obviously there are things you can't change, like I'll give you a really great example. Back to office, return to office stuff, right? Is something where, again, when you're evaluating your projects and what's happening, return to office is a compliance thing. It's not it's really not something, I'm sure there's conversations initially about it, but at some point it's compliance going to happen, employee feedback. It might impact how you're rolling out or how you're doing things, or maybe make some suggestions, but it's likely not going to change whether you're going back to the office or not.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you're asking for feedback on also. Is there opportunity to really consider what the feedback is? Or have we as an organization made, we've called our stakeholders resistant and we've shut them down and we don't listen to them anymore?
Yes. Yeah, all good. And there's a similar, like the next question here is, so if it's you've got a lot of quiet people and you're still not getting right feedback, and you really want to hear from, maybe it's a department, maybe that department's being really, really quiet, or key people within an organization who are quite influential and you're not hearing from them. What might be the approach to hear from those quiet folks?
So if this were me, I'd go and have some conversations, one-on-one conversations with some people. I'd want to really better understand what's happening there. And it's probably, again, there's probably more underneath that to really understand.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are things you can influence and do about it, and sometimes there isn't. But I actually find if you open those doors and you really honestly look to engage, and if you spend some time, one-on-one, I'll just give you a quick example. There was an internal stakeholder, somebody who I really, really, really respected in the organization where we were changing the strategy to execution pipeline. And she wasn't verbal, like she wasn't providing a whole lot of feedback to us, but she was providing some pretty negative feedback to some other people. And when we, her and I went out for lunch and we talked more about it, and I had a better understanding of what her concerns were. They were real. They felt like, that this particular initiative wasn't taking into consideration carefully enough the impacts to internal customers and what this was really going to do and mean for them. It's usually about not empathizing or understanding what the impacts are and how you might be making somebody's job a lot harder. To accomplish. So if they're quiet or reluctant stakeholders, I would do a little digging and I would try a couple of different ways. Putting them in a room to provide feedback is probably not going to work, where there's other people. But spending some time one-on-one or, genuinely trying to understand what's going on there can help you move the dial a lot quicker.
Sounds like to be curious, right?
Be curious, not furious.
That's right. I love that. So we've got a question here from Marie. It's again along the same lines, but it's more around morale, and probably the underlying thing there could be about energy. So how to maintain the energy, the morale of a team, throughout so many periods of change, ongoing periods of change.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for sure. And I think, some of what I'm explaining to you or what I've shared with you so far is like happy path, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really, if you have the opportunity to approach change in some of the ways I've described in your organization, you're going to make a big difference. Sometimes you don't have those opportunities, right? Sometimes, we're doing this, end of story. And that you hope that the story that tells over time, if you're in the right position in the organization, is if we're not delivering fully the ROI, then we need to be trying to understand why, like what's really sort of going on here, and use data. Do we have a high turnover? Are we losing good people? Do we have worse than losing people is disengaged people who just don't care anymore? Like they're more damaging than do we care about our corporate culture? Do we care about being successful together? And those are hard conversations to have for sure. But that's definitely what it's telling you when you've got disengaged people who aren't sharing. It's telling you something. If I do a presentation and there's no questions, I know right away. Got to dig. Something's going on here.
Be that, get out your pith helmet, be the organizational archaeologist.
Right? Exactly.
And dig for the layers and that info. I love that. Okay, so let's see. We've got so many others. There's such good questions here and so many rich sources of future topics as well. So what about a team that has communication challenges? So Yvonne has asked a really good question. How can a project team overcome communication challenges with that stakeholder group, with the team itself? What are some tips around opening up that dialogue and being a better communicator?
Right. Again, It's really trying to understand what the root cause of the issues are. What is the root cause of the issues? Because that might determine the approach that you're going to take. Is it a team that has that where there's a real lack of trust on the team? And I don't know if folks know about some basic concepts like Leoncini's pyramid of functional teams. Is there a lack of trust? That lack of trust is always at the bottom of that pyramid. Mm-hmm. Without a lack of trust, you don't get risk-taking and innovation and engagement. If that's there, then you've got some deep work to do, with a lack of trust. Maybe it's bringing somebody in to help you sort that out. Maybe it's doing a canvas with your group to try and identify where some of your, concerns and issues might be. Mm-hmm. It really sort of depends on some of the root causes for things. And maybe it's a really difficult stakeholder. They do exist. And so while I, encourage to engage and to be open to feedback, sometimes, not as often as you might think, but sometimes it's a really difficult stakeholder that you maybe need to be talking to a senior leader about. That who's becoming a real barrier to success. Yes. So I like to use the stick as a very, very, very last, a last step in trying to sort things out. But if that's where you get to, that's where you get to.
Yeah. Sounds like also too like an opportunity to reframe things with certain individuals, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you have to show up at their office with, some, a couple of donuts and some coffee, right?
The other thing that I will say is I often find when that's happening at a project team level, it's because up the chain, there's a lack of clarity. Mm. Up the chain, there's still a lack of clarity and a lack of alignment about what's happening here. And it starts to come out here. It's sort of like, the high conflict divorce in parents, and you see it in a kid. It's like that. It's, at that senior level, if there isn't that lack of alignment and that very clear messaging down, it'll show up on teams, and they'll feel the pressure, and they'll feel those competing, this one's boss might be bad mouthing this one's boss, or might be, do you know what I mean? Sort of adding to that. So again, it's really sort of analyzing root causes for these things.
So many organizations, it's how do we operationalize strategy, right? And then you've got the human component, which makes it more complex. So it's a recipe for all sorts of, really challenging things to overcome. But certainly alignment sounds like it's incredibly important.
Alignment, I think, is the top. If you have, Apple has, they're amazing with their execution, right? Like we all get these amazing products from them, like regularly. They're amazing with execution. And the CEO of Apple talks about alignment, that we all know exactly what we're supposed to be doing, and we are all rowing the boat in the same direction. And if you don't have that, you've got a swervy path to that end goal. So they place a lot of emphasis, a lot of regular alignment sessions, a lot of stakeholder engagement to iterate and get better.
Well, Deb, I'm mindful that people are starting to hop off. Everyone's really, really busy. And, I'm so thankful that they chose to spend their lunch hour with us and to listen to you. So I just wanted to say again, thank you so very much. I've heard from Shaylin, and so our lucky winner of the $100 gift card to Thermea is Jennifer Uwaka. I'm sorry, Jen, if I have not said your last name correctly. Jen's with the City Credit Union. So congratulations to Jen and to everyone who asked amazing, amazing questions. I'd like to think that the questions, of course, were because this is an incredibly important and timely topic, and also a little bit of a reward to ask questions, to get engaged by Thermea is also a help, to get people to start typing in some great things. So thank you, Deb.
Again, just a last call out, if you'd like to reach out to me online here or online, on LinkedIn, and you're interested in hearing more about any of those things that I've talked about, I'm happy to chat about them.
Yeah, thank you. And may everyone have a restful season. If you're taking time off, get what you need to recharge. This is the season of rest. I was talking about that with someone about gardening earlier. So let's all have a safe, holiday season. do what you need to do, get from it so that you can be back with your best self in the new year. Thank you, Deb and Online Business Systems. Thanks, Shaylin, for doing the slides for us. And thanks to everyone for being here. We'll go back now to the virtual floor for those who can continue to join us. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.